This is where it maybe takes a little bit of a darker turn.
Run Totti Run!
It's obviously an emotional story because it's so personal, but is it something that you're taught to just focus on that emotion anyway, coming from the Pixar background?
I was always like, I have to do this. This is, for Totti. If I just abandon this, then I feel like I would be abandoning him. So I wasn't around when he passed away. I know that this is on my mind. I'm going to do a short about a dog. And literally like a week later, this amazing artist was like, hey, I want to join your short. Oh my God, this is real. Okay, we're going to do this.
What was your first kind of break into just the animation industry in general?
Then started just looking into Disney, the schools around that. And then I started to see CalArts. So I applied to CalArts. Any guesses on whether I got into CalArts?
I'm going to say no.
And so I kept going from department to department. It just kind of like, who are you, kid? No, get out of here. Years later, when I was working at Pixar.
The Pixar thing, you say that so casually, like later on I was working at Pixar. How does one get into Pixar?
Dude, that's the question, right?
Hey, Shad.
How's it going?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good, yeah. I love your guys' background. It's so colorful.
It's a kind of a special location for us because we're doing some virtual production on this site, and this room that we're in is kind of like a showroom for like really cool bespoke furniture.
Nice.
I'm on a very heavy chair. I can't adjust this chair, can I?
And I'm standing. I'm doing the...
Have you got one of those fancy adjustable ones?
I do, yeah.
I remember the first time I saw one of those wind-up desks, it was actually an animation supervisor, a lady called Leslie Hedrick. We were working on Pirates in Adventurous Scientist. I think you was working on Arthur Christmas. Those films were kind of working at the same time. So.
Oh, nice. Aardman, man, I'm kind of envious.
You was working with them, right?
Outsourced, basically. So it didn't really feel like working with Aardman. We just worked with basically one lady.
Yeah, it was great working there, actually. But enough about me, Shad. This episode's all about you today. The spotlight is all on you.
I have tons of stories that can go on and on, so feel free to just stop me at any point.
Hey guys, so before we dive into today's episode, we wanted to talk to you about something really important, which is subscribing to the channel. If you're already a part of our incredible community, thank you so much, and it really means the world to us. But if you're new here and you've been watching the content for a while and you haven't hit that subscribe button, we would really appreciate it if you could just take a second to do so. In return, we promise to keep creating, improving, and bringing you bigger and better content. Now back to the episode.
So yes, my name's Shad Bradbury. I've been an animator for about 20 years now. I worked at Pixar, Sony, Rhythm and Hues, Tippett. I worked in games for about 3 years as well. I feel like most animators, they have a similar story where when they were kids, they watch Saturday morning cartoons and they loved Disney and all that. I did not. I never liked animation. I kind of disliked it, to be honest. It wasn't until a day in high school I came home and there was an episode of Dragon Ball Z. And that changed the trajectory of my life from there. Then I wanted to work in the anime industry because Dragon Ball Z leads to anime, and then moving to Japan and wanting to work there. That did not work out. And so then I just got into animation in general from anime, and I then started just looking into Disney, the schools around that, and then I started to see CalArts, so I applied to CalArts. Any guesses on whether I got into CalArts?
I'm going to say no.
Yes, sorry. That's awesome.
I've got a feeling you asked that because the obvious one would be yes, but I've got a feeling it's a no.
So I teach and I always ask my students that, and I can tell because it's the first day. They want to say no, but they don't want to offend me. You're right. They sent me one of those nice rejection letters, which I have right here.
Oh, let's read it.
I keep waiting for them to ask me to do a talk so that then I can send them back their rejection letter.
Brilliant.
No, I don't have it. I'm not that bitter.
It's not fair. Why?
What was funny is years later when I was working at Pixar, I met a guy who went to CalArts and he applied the same year. He actually got accepted. It was kind of ironic because he was unemployed looking for a job with a really hefty loan from CalArts and I was working. So
the Pixar thing, you say that so casually, like later on I was working at Pixar. How does one get into Pixar?
Dude, that's the question, right?
That's a straight question because that's everybody's question, isn't it, really? It's
changed a little bit, but particularly like a decade ago or so, no one got into Pixar. You didn't even see Pixar demo reels. Pixar was this black hole of how? So I remember never even applying there, right? My goal at that time was to try to get into Blue Sky or maybe DreamWorks because, this was Kung Fu Panda kind of time. So I was working at Sony, I think on Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs. One of my friends who had worked at Sony, I had heard just got hired at Pixar. And I was like, wait, what? Mentally I was comparing myself with her and I was like, I think I'm comparable. I mean, she's awesome and she's maybe better than me, but I still feel like, oh, okay. So weirdly, that just kind of opened up my brain and I was like, oh, well, I guess I better just apply. So literally I just went online. Those things where they say, apply online and you think no one's ever going to read it. Like this is not going anywhere. And at least at Pixar, I can promise you that somebody sees it because it was like 6 months later, I got a random call from them. So
in the industry, you was working at like Sony and places before that. And we'll come back to the Disney thing. What was your first kind of break into just the animation industry in general?
I feel like it's pretty safe to say that I really climbed the ladder. Like I didn't really ever get lucky. So like I went to 3 schools. So I went to a technical school for 2 years. I went to the Art Institute of Phoenix for 4 years. Then I went to Animation Mentor for 3 years or whatever it is. So at the end of the Art Institute of Phoenix, I still wanted to be a 2D animator. And this was right around the time 2D animation industry was kind of dying and collapsing on itself. The last kind of 2D film, which was Curious George, there was a small studio right next to our school, Art Institute of Phoenix, called Fat Cat Studios. And they were working on Curious George. It's a fun story. Do you want me to go into it?
I love a fun story, Shad. Go for it.
It's good for people trying to get into the industry. So I had spoken with this guy before I graduated, and he said, yeah, when you graduate, come over to the studio and we'll talk. And in my weird student brain, I took that as like, oh, I've got a job. And I show up and I'm like, here I am, ready for a job. And I remember him, he just kind of like laughed. He's like, okay, well, he's like, why don't you go around the studio and see if any of the department needs help, and then we'll talk. And I was like, okay, cool. Should we talk about money? He's like, and he just laughed. He said, well, why don't you see if anyone needs any work? And so I kept going from department to department. It just kind of like, who are you, kid? Like, no, get out of here.
Go home. Go.
And until I got to the VFX department, they were really slammed. They were actually behind. And I think the guy took pity on me and could see at this point how like desperate I was. So he basically he gave me one drawing. He's like, why don't you try this one in between and we'll see how it goes. So I just basically from there went in day after day and just kept doing stuff until it was probably 3 months later where he came up to me. He's like, hey, maybe this isn't my place, but are you getting paid? And I was like, no, man, what the hell's going on? And he's like, because you're actually doing a lot of work now. You should probably be getting paid. And I was like, I should be. And so from there, he went over to the boss and then was like, hey, Chad's actually doing a lot of work. We got to put him on the payroll. And so then they put me on the payroll. So
is that your advice for anybody who wanted to get into the industry, just turn up and just start doing stuff?
My theory is we've just got to keep doing it until someone pays us. And that's kind of what I'm doing with directing now is like, I'm just going to keep directing until someone says, oh, this is awesome. Here you go. Because I don't think sitting around waiting for people to pay us before we do the work works very often. So,
I mean, that kind of leads us, which is onto Run Totti Run, like directing. How did Run Totti Run, the project in general, start off? Where did that all begin?
Back when I was at the Art Institute of Phoenix, we had a saying, every animator is just a frustrated director. And I definitely fit this bill. I always wanted to direct. That was my main goal. How Run Totti Run came about was I was already at Pixar and I met a girl, like every great story starts with. We were getting married and she got accepted to a school in Chicago. She wanted to take it and we had the awful choice of like, okay, we're getting married. Do we want, for the first 3 years of our marriage, do we want to be apart? I decided to leave Pixar, which was a heartbreaking decision because Pixar, honestly, is an amazing place. It's one of the only places where they actually care about you as the artist. For me, I felt like if I had animated anywhere else, I would kind of be going backwards. Okay, maybe I could be a lead or a suit somewhere, but I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. So maybe I'll use this kind of time to start directing. And then it was like, okay, what story am I going to tell? And this is where, maybe it takes a little bit of a darker turn. And about this time, I lost my dog. It was heartbreaking. I won't go into it. I was with an ex. It was me and my ex's dog, and so I wasn't around when he passed away. Anytime something's on my mind a lot, usually what I do is I kind of draw through it or animate through it. So I tend to do a lot of 2D animation. That's kind of, I guess, how I process this is I was like, okay, well, I know that this is on my mind. I'm going to do a short about a dog. And so my last film at Pixar was Coco that time. So then I requested all the dog shots, Dante shots, because I was trying to prep and be like, okay. I was asking around and someone told me about Artella. Artella was supposed to be this place where you could just go pitch a project and artists would submit. And I was like, okay. And so I maybe spent 5 minutes and was like, hey, I'm doing this short. And literally like a week later, this amazing artist was like, hey, I want to join your short. Her name was Aki Yoon. A week later, she did these amazing drawings. And without that, I don't know if it would have been real. That one person doing those drawings. And I was like, oh my God, this is real. Okay, we're gonna do this.
Is that where one person joined and then another person joined and then end up being 300 people? Is that what happened? So people just started to join the project and show interest through Artella?
Yeah, so how did it get to 300?
And how the hell do you manage that many people? Do you put multiple hats on, like the director, organizing teams? I mean, that's a big number.
I think the assumption is that because I'd worked in the industry and I worked at these places, that I just got all my friends to help me out. But I don't know if I just have terrible friends or what, but honestly, very few of my friends worked on it. Just because honestly, most of the people I know are like senior animators, that they have families, that they've already kind of accomplished their goals. So they don't want to work on a short. So finding the right people at the right time is critical for a project like this. And so honestly, the way I found most of the people was just literally cold calling. I would go to like, say, Animation Mentor Showcase Reel, or I would just look for animation demo reels, and I would probably once a day, I would send about 10 emails. Just, hey, my name's blah, blah, blah. Would you be interested? It's a lot of grueling hard work just to find people, to be honest. I wish there was a better way.
Do you put together like sketches and ideas, or is it just a kind of a brief? What kind of thing did you put on there for people to be attracted to?
We never had a great pitch, to be honest. I was very open about the story from the get-go. And we approached it very much kind of like the Pixar style, where story was kind of first. So before we did any kind of production work, we had done an animatic. And the first animatic was me just literally with note cards being like, and this is what happens, and this is what happens. And I recorded myself and I sent it to about 20 people and got notes back. And then we did a second pass. Like 6 months later, I brought on 4 artists. We actually did a full-fledged animatic. Then we showed it to like 50 people and then showed it a third time. Showed it to about 100 people that time and then got notes back and then did it. And so then when anyone ever joined the project, I basically just said, hey, this is me, this is my history, and here's the story I want to tell.
What was it like writing a story that is so kind of personal? Was that kind of easy or quite difficult?
I'm glad that I made it so personal and I encourage anyone who wants to make a short, especially if it's like one of their first ones, you better make it personal, because the process is just so hard. That this brilliant idea that you have in your head that you think is, transformational, that you just absolutely love. A few years from now, when you're in the middle of it, you're going to think it's the stupidest idea ever. How did you ever think it's good? And it's going to be so easy for you to just kind of ditch what you have and go on to this new idea. And I think one of the biggest things that you can kind of use against that is making it really personal, because you're not going to ditch something that's super personal. So like, I was always like, I have to do this. Like, this is, for Totti. If I just abandon this, then I feel like I would be abandoning him. So
it's obviously an emotional story because it's so personal. But is it something that you're taught to just focus on that emotion anyway, coming from the Pixar background?
I knew at the beginning I didn't want it to be super sad. I wanted humor, and I tried so hard, but I wasn't as successful as I wanted. I remember at one point someone was like, dude, your character's like crying like 4 times. You got to cut out some of these cry scenes.
Oh, really?
I think it would be a lie to say that I didn't want to pull on people's heartstrings, but I also didn't want people to just be and that's the only takeaway from it. I was hoping that there would be some joy mixed in with hearts. And usually humor is a really good way. What I'm finding and what I found is that if you can get people to laugh, it's much easier to make them cry. I think a good story has a little bit of all, and I would definitely say that comes from Pixar, a good balance.
Did you personally have the character designs yourself?
No, Aki Yoon, she came on. She was on probably the longest out of anyone. It was a 5-year production. She was on maybe the first 3 years.
And she brought it to life.
She did, yeah. So she did the designs. She boarded, I would say, the majority of the film as well. A lot of this film is, through her eyes. So I owe a lot to her.
Was that the actual visual style as well from Oki as well? That painterly.
No, I'll give that to a guy named Santiago. So he has a render engine that used to be called MNPRX. It's now called Flare. I encourage artists to take a look at it because it's pretty awesome. It's just a really simple way for artists like us to try to replicate some of the things that the bigger studios are now doing, like into the Spider-Verse and stuff like that. What was cool is we didn't really have any rendering. Literally, everything that you see was in my viewport.
Oh, really?
That's what was kind of cool and really saved us, because it would have been really challenging if we had to go through render, and then do redo. So it was really quick to just be like, oh, yeah. So that was all MNPRX or Flare.
Was there any technical challenges that were really difficult on this project?
I mean, the style, literally, he was kind of developing it with us. So we definitely ran into a lot of things. I would say lighting was definitely something I probably failed at a little bit as a director. I tried to bring on a lot of lighting artists, but they would have to learn this new software, and it was like a work in progress. So oftentimes they would do a little bit and they would try to get it to a certain place, but then there would be a new update and then they'd have to redo it again. And since it's all volunteers, anytime you ask a volunteer to redo work, you know that they're gonna.
You kind of go. You don't have to, but if you don't mind, it would be really great if you could tweak this for the 10th time.
Exactly, and usually they're gone about a month later. Once you do that. The first scene we did, I did it like we normally would. Like, we did the set and we kind of did it with a lot of detail, and then we put it through the render engine, and it wasn't looking very good. And we realized that it was because there was all this detail, and you don't have a lot of detail often with watercolor. So then we started like pulling back on the detail, which saved us a lot of time, and it started working much better.
The 5 years that it took, was that kind of like, I want to get it done in 5 years, or was that just, it'll get done when it gets done? And did you set any like deadlines and milestones along the way?
I started at Pixar and I brought on a production guy. He lasted maybe about a year. One of the very first things is he set up a schedule. And here's what I suggest. We'll schedule it for 4 years, but we'll expect it to go 5 years. And then literally the day that it was finished, I went back to that email, and it was 5 days from the day that he sent that.
No.
So it was 5 years and 5 days. So pretty dang close.
The idea of sort of connecting Totti and the main character with that kind of, I'm not calling it a string, what's the kind of thing that connects them two together?
I love that everyone's trying to come up with umbilical cord. I've read. I like that.
What do you call it?
We call it the entanglement, because scientifically there's that theory, right, that you can, no matter how far apart two things are, like you can turn a penny and the other penny will turn, kind of. I'm not a scientist, but that's where that originally came from. I read, was it the Ender's Game series? I think they have something like that. I forget what they call it, but there's, characters that, go off to a different planet, and basically they can communicate through this like connection that they have. And I always loved that feeling. When I told you that I pitched it like this, that was the one kind of takeaway from that review session, because I was worried that everyone was going to be like, I don't know about this, but we actually got positive notes. Like, I like that thing.
It's a strong visual moment though, where it does sort of snap. Because I guess that really visually shows like that connection is gone. To see break for me was like, ouch.
Was it clear that the thing that connected them that then broke, it fell down, and then what lights up at the end is the entanglement lighting back up? You connect those?
Yeah, especially with the colours and the design of the thing. It almost felt like those bits that were coming out the water were those kind of segments. If you were to zoom straight into the entanglement, it would be made up of these kind of things.
Oh, awesome. That makes me feel good, because that was the one thing I'm like, I don't know if people are connecting that idea, but in general, just the entanglement, I was really worried, because to have this magical thing that's always in the scene, it sounds like everyone's just going to look at this magical thing in the screen and not ever pay attention to your characters. My wife, I don't think ever was sold on the idea until just recently. She's like, I was not sold on that idea, but I think you pulled it off. I wanted it to be present, but I wanted people to forget about it. So I wanted at the beginning to make it very obvious, like, here it is, but then hopefully just kind of like it was in the background and it was part of their relationship. The very beginning sequence was meant to be like a memory. It's literally like we're in the entanglement seeing memories, and then
That's it. I was saying, like, you see those kind of like segments of it that you kind of dip in and out of, and sort of paints that picture at the start. You know, that big run sequence at the start. You know, the camera, like, it's so energetic. The performance, it's so fun to watch. I felt like there's moments with the camera where it goes to kind of like video game platform moments, where it's kind of like almost like a game of you could play on a mobile device, you know, like, and then he goes back into the dynamic movements and stuff. Was that sort of inspired by games?
No, I wouldn't say that. I tend to like low cameras from profile just because of an animator. It tends to be the clearest thing. So I do, when you say that, I think I know the exact shot you're talking about. And I got notes from my anim soups being like, hey, that's a weird camera move. Are you like, you can adjust that? I was like, I like it.
I liked it. I thought it was really fun.
I held off for so long because I wanted to animate that first shot where they're running. And originally it was all just one camera, but then when one of the animators got it, he wanted to cut some things up. So it turned into, there was some camera cuts, but that I held on to for myself because I just wanted to animate that scene. And it was also meant to kind of help clarify, like, oh, the entanglement, the characters can go wherever they want and it'll stick with them. So
you mentioned like you only animated one shot on this. What's it like receiving things and thinking, if I could just open up that Maya file, I can just tweak it myself? Was it ever tempting to just jump in and just do a bit while they're not on the shot?
I didn't very much, and it was a good thing I didn't open the Maya files, because a few times I did, boy, it like, as soon as you open up a Maya file, you're like, oh my God, this is a mess. This is way worse. Like, this is way worse than I thought. And then you change one thing, and then it changes the next, and it changes the whole scene. And I just didn't have time to do that. I definitely did on promo, which is where I noticed like some of the shots where I was like, ooh, okay. There were some cases where, like, when we started doing effects on top of stuff, that's when it was like, oh man, I probably should have had somebody check these scenes before we completely finalized them. That's something we'll be doing on the next show, is actually hopefully having the leads at least just going in and looking and being like, okay, this is pretty broken.
I always find that sometimes, you know, working with so many different people have so many different ways of doing things, and it's always painful when you go into someone else's scene. It's like, how the heck have they done this? Like, this, I wouldn't do it like this. But you can never expect everybody to do it the way that you would do it. So you kind of have to just let go and appreciate that they're doing their thing. What will you take into the next project that you learned from this?
The cameras didn't get a lot of love. Like, literally, we did layout, and we were so rushed. Like, we did layout, and then we just threw it straight into anim, and the cameras never got any love besides what was in layout or whatever the animator might have done. And some animators will go into cameras and some just won't touch them at all, right? And so that's one of the things that I probably should have done better. I should have brought on a camera person whose job was to, like, go in and do camera polish on top and make sure that everything's there. Yeah, so camera is definitely something. One of the things I learned was just people, finding the right person at the right time. If you can find that person, oh man. And usually the right person is someone who hasn't quite made it. They've gone through school. Maybe they're working at a smaller studio, but they want to work at Disney. They want to work at Pixar, but they, for whatever reason, they just can't get there. And they're just really motivated. If you can grab those people, I feel like, oh man, they'll take your project to the next level. All of my animation leads, we had 4 of them. And I don't think any of them were working at a big studio, but now all of them are working at big studios. So I literally just sent out an email. Hey guys, do you want to work on the next one? I'm pretty sure that all of them will be like, sorry, dude. I think one of them said that he would if DreamWorks would allow it, but it's just they're in different states of their life, which I totally understand.
Moving into this next project, is it funded or is it another one of these again, but bigger?
It's called Growing Up with Grandpa. It's about a little blind girl who's going on a journey to find a cure for her dying grandfather. I think it's a really great story. At the moment, it is unfunded. It's starting just like Totti was, but the goal for this one is to actually make money. We're hoping to either get a studio behind us or get it funded. We just had our first story screening, so it's an hour and 57 minutes. We have our first animatic. We're going to do the same thing like we did before, where we do another. We got notes. Now we're going to do it again and again, and we'll show more and more people, and then we'll start production. Yeah, you want to work on it?
Yeah, well, sign me up. Let's go.
One thing I would love to do better is production. I never worked out for Totti. if there's any production producer people out there that want to work on my next film, that would be amazing.
Clearly, you're enjoying doing this enough to kind of step into the next project, and not only just another project, it's bigger. Would you ever look at pitching and saying to Disney and say, can I direct something like a short there and then step back into that world? Or is this a completely new path that you're enjoying at the moment?
Yeah, I thought about that. I currently work remotely for Pixar right now, actually, and I'll definitely reach out to them and see. The issue with some of those things is that the line to get there is just so long. So I'm not someone who wants to direct Alvin and the Chipmunks 15 or Hotel Transylvania 15, right? Like,
sure.
So I think there's two different paths for directors. You can kind of direct what's taken to you and you're happy because you're directing, or I kind of want to do, I'm not comparing myself to Miyazaki, but I want to do that route where you do your own films, where you tell your own stories. And I have no idea how you do that. Do you know how you get someone to pay you to do that?
No, I don't actually, Shad, but I guess like you said at the very start, you're clearly not just sitting around waiting to get something, you're just doing it and thinking, oh, this is all I know. If I want to tell a story, I just want to take a step forward, and then clearly it kind of rolls. And then before you know it, 5 years later, you've got a feature film that is quite exciting, I imagine.
Nah, that's the whole. Hopefully, it's 5 years from now, but it took 5 years for a short. So let's hope it's not like 15 years. You're emailing me.
Just finish it in 2, Shad, please.
Okay.
Try and finish it in 2.
I'll change the schedule.
We'll go back a little bit, starting in the 2D world. Where did you then transition and dip your toe into the 3D world?
So right after Curious George, that studio tried to hang on, but they couldn't because there was just no more 2D stuff. So I left there, and I remember the guy, he was like, just promise me that you'll keep drawing. And I was like, yeah, I promise. And then I don't think I barely drew for the next 10 years. Because there was a local game studio. I still had some 3D animation at that point from my Art Institute of Phoenix. So I applied in. I was lucky and I got in. They were a small startup studio. They paid for higher education, and there was a new school coming out that was like the new hot stuff. It was Animation Mentor. So it was like the first online school, and it was a big deal because the mentors were actually working professionals, which back then I felt like rarely happened. You got a few retired maybe artists. And then when I graduated, I went to Comic-Con. I was just walking around. We walked through this booth, and they were like, hey, give us your demo reel, give us your demo reel. I looked at the studio, and I was like, I've never heard of it. And I was like, no, thank you. No, thank you. And my friend was like, come on, man. And she's like, we'll give you a free t-shirt. We'll give you a free t-shirt. And I was like, no, thank you. Because at the time, demo reels, like, they were tough because you had to put them on VHS. So like, it was way more precious because like it was a lot of work to do a demo reel. So it wasn't just like a link. So I was like, no. And my friend's like, dude, don't be a jerk. Just, it's a free shirt. And so I was like, fine. And I gave her my demo reel, and she gave me this huge oversized t-shirt, and I remember literally walking just a few steps and throwing it in the trash. And then 6 months later, I get a call and saying, hey, this is blah, blah, blah from Rhythm and Hues. We had, is it Shad? We'd like you to work on Night at the Museum. I was like, what? Like, and because I think it was a sequel. So I was like, I know this is Ben Still. Like, this is do you want me to animate rocks? I think I even asked that because I was like, I can't animate. Like, they're like, no, you're going to be a character animator. So that was kind of my, I guess, my first step into, feature 3D.
Shad, we read somewhere that you were named by a drunk guy at a bar.
Yeah. The story is, obviously I wasn't there, that my parents were at a bar. My parents probably wouldn't like the story now, but they were, partiers at the time. And my mom was pregnant with me, and she swears to me she wasn't drinking, but I'm like, maybe that's why. And so she was asking around the bar, like, hey, what should we name our son to be? And the story goes that a drunk guy next to them was like, name is Shad. And he tried to say Chad, but he slurred his word and said Shad. And they were like, Shad. Oh, I like that. So I'm not named after the moon or the stars or some awesome person.
A mispronounced other name. We like to talk a little bit about, that work-life balance. This is a great example of working for Pixar and also working on kind of personal projects at the same time. How do you kind of juggle two big things like that, and life and everything else?
That's a tough question. You definitely have to prioritize things. So for during Totti and for the most part, even though I'm working at Pixar, it's just for one show. You have to prioritize what's important. So obviously my wife and family are the most important, and then doing this short. So what that entailed for us for a long time was that we've been living really poor, just so that we can both do our thing. She can act it, and I can do these things. So we've obviously not prioritized money. We could be living in a better place and nicer situations, but we chose to kind of put that down. So I think that's the best thing I can say. I think so often we feel like we have to have like certain things. Like we have to have a nice place, we have to have this, we have to have that. And then all those things that we have to have tend to stop us from doing the things that we actually want, right?
What do you do to kind of like keep fresh mentally as well?
I'm not a great person to say, get up away from your desk, because I tend to need someone to be like my wife, be like, hey, come on, get up and move around. Walking the dogs are really great because so it's like a requirement, like they're whining. So usually that's a good way to tell me I've been sitting down too long, trying to stand up like I'm doing now versus sitting down. So I don't, I already have terrible posture. But
I was going to say advice getting into the industry and how do you get into Pixar, but you seem to just apply on the internet, the website. That seems crazy to do, but it clearly works.
Yeah, I think the best advice I can give is definitely apply and then forget about it. Actors have a thing where they take the script, that they learn it, they have their audition, and then literally they throw it in the trash afterwards as like a symbolic, like not in front of the people. But and I encourage all my students and everyone to do the same thing. We've got to forget about it. So I'll apply, and then don't sit there like all of us have probably done, like, oh my God. Hello. I found that all these places that I thought I didn't get the job, like months later, they call me. I found in my life that usually, maybe this is bad, but I often get the things that I want or ask for, but it's almost never on the timeline that I want. So usually, and oftentimes I don't want it by the time I
I used to want it. Now I don't want it.
Exactly. So timing isn't something we can really control, but yeah, just apply and forget about it, and then just keep doing what you love.
Oh, that's great piece of advice, Shad. Thank you very much. Spoke about everything that we wanted to touch on, Shad, and I just want to say that was incredible. Honestly, I really appreciate your time. We do wish you all the best with the next project that you're obviously working on at the moment.
Awesome, man. Yes, thank you.
And you know what? I mean, if there's anything we can do to help out as a small studio, I don't know on what capacity.
You've committed to it. It's recorded. Yeah.
This is how it starts now. Yeah, we're in. When's the next meeting? Yeah, again, Shad, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you. Awesome. Nice meeting you.
Take care, man.
See ya.